Zooey Mama! We are talking about Scorn today, the newest card coming to Marvel Snap, and possibly the savior of the non-Hela discard archetypes. We're going to be talking all about her, her best synergies, her decks, the pros, the cons, and I'll give you my official prediction on this Spotlight Week and Scorn herself, if she's going to be worth it, and I'll show you the community's prediction as well, if they think she's going to be worth buying or if she might be a bit of a bust. So Scorn coming out October 15th alongside Jean Grey and Sebastian Shaw. One cost, 2 powered card with the ability, when you discard her, she will return to your hand and she will get +2 power and also give +2 power to one of your cards that's already revealed on the board. So similar to Apocalypse, where you can keep discarding her over and over and over, but you're actually getting plus power not just to the card itself, like Apocalypse, you're getting plus power to one of your cards on the board. So it's spreading this power out, and you never have to play her in order to realize that power. And you don't even need Dracula to realize it either. You could just be powering up whatever cards you have on the board. So very interesting. Seems very powerful off the bat, but let's dive more into detail. So let's start by looking at some of Scorn's best synergies in Snap. Well, obviously, she's pretty designed for discard. A card like Dracula does love her. Dracula now works where he's gaining the power of the card that gets discarded. It's not just replacing his power. So it's okay if Scorn hits him with like a +2 here and there, and then at the very end of the game, Dracula looks to discard Scorn. We also just have a lot of redundancy with Apocalypse, okay? All of these decks that you would run, Dracula and Apocalypse and these more traditional discard archetypes, you now have redundancy because now if you don't draw Apocalypse, maybe you drew your Scorn, okay? So if you discard her a bunch, maybe she gets to 10 power herself, and Dracula can even discard the Scorn. You know, maybe you draw both, and you actually decide to play Apocalypse on turn 6, even though you have Dracula on board. Normally, you just never play Apocalypse, because you need Dracula to discard him after the game ends. But if your Scorn is big enough, you can actually play your 14 plus power Apocalypse, whatever it may be, and then have Dracula discard Scorn. So it's very interesting. And then a card like Sebastian Shaw, we'll see what kind of hybrids come out, if it is possible to make more than just a traditional discard deck with Scorn. If it is, though, a card like Sebastian Shaw could benefit, right? If you had a deck where you could pretty consistently discard Scorn multiple times with a Shaw on board, that could get huge. So this is a bit more experimental, but maybe she has some room there. In terms of what she gets countered by, it's very hard to actually counter her directly, but these traditional discard decks really get hit by Shadow King and Red Guardian. Okay, now she is getting +2 power herself, so that could be a target for Shadow King, but usually you will either not play Scorn at all, or you will look to play her on turn 6. So it's actually very hard to hit Scorn with the Shadow King, but if she was giving +2 to the same target on board over and over and over, that target could get hit by Shadow King. And of course, if you're playing Scorn, you are almost certainly playing a card like Dracula, playing a card like Morbius, maybe you're playing the Collector. All of these cards get wrecked by Red Guardian. Okay, Red Guardian is so good against traditional discard decks, and if you watch my recent new card videos, almost all of them have Red Guardian as a counter, okay? White Widow was also just nerfed. She's basically not really worth it unless you're also playing Red Guardian now. Red Guardian now really synergizes with her. So he's just been getting so many more good targets in the game. If you're not currently playing Red Guardian, you might want to start, okay? He's just countering everything out here. So to talk about the good and the bad for Scorn in more detail, for the good, she scales insanely well. I mean, each time you discard her, you're essentially gaining +4 power. Scorn herself is gaining +2. Something on the board is gaining +2. That is crazy, okay? If you discard her 3 times, she is essentially a 1/14. And the opposition would be something like Swarm. Traditionally, you would play Swarm and Apocalypse in a deck, and each time you discard Swarm, you get 2 copies, and they're 3 power, so you're really only gaining +3 power, but then you need board space. Sometimes you don't actually play them all. With Scorn, she's powering up faster, and you don't need all that board space, okay? So very, very powerful for a 1-cost card. I mean, she really only gets outshined by something like Human Torch or Deadpool, something that can double up is what can ramp faster than her, but she goes crazy. She goes big. She does fit into traditional discard, as I mentioned. It's a pretty cheap archetype, right? I mean, if you're just in Series 3, you don't have any or many Series 4, Series 5 cards, you have Morbius, you have Dracula, you have Apocalypse. I mean, you can make these decks, okay? It's very player-friendly and new player-friendly, is what I would say. She's almost impossible to directly counter, as I mentioned. Your opponent can't play something to discard her from your hand that would only help you out. All they can try and do is hit the cards that she synergizes with that are already on the board. So if she ends up being insanely powerful, it's going to be very hard for your opponent to deal with, okay? Especially if she sees play in multiple decks and archetypes, if she does have that potential. And again, she really improves this level of redundancy for discard decks, which in turn improves consistency. If you don't draw the Apocalypse or you don't draw the Swarm, you now have a third card you can draw that can be discarded over and over and over, and that's what some of these decks want. Now, in terms of the bad, I think Scorn is good. I think undoubtedly the amount of power that Scorn can push out is really good, right? And we've seen this with Apocalypse, spitting out +4 power each time a discard happens, okay? Scorn actually ramps a bit better because she's hitting something on the board, she can hit multiple things, and you can play her a bit easier if needed. But she's going to be very niche, and so she may be a case of good card, bad deck, as Glazer with Snap Judgments likes to put it here. Good card, bad deck. I think undoubtedly she's going to be good, but we don't know if the decks she can play in are going to be good, right? If she is the MVP of the discard archetype, but traditional discard, non-Hela decks aren't good or aren't very competitive, then it doesn't matter, okay? So that's something to consider. Kind of, when I talked about Scream earlier in the month, I'm like, Scream looks pretty good, but the deck she's in, they still need some work. I think they still need some assistance, okay? Could be a similar thing here. If she does end up carrying traditional discard archetype to the top of the meta, and it's got a decent play rate, and let's say a really high win rate, something's getting nerfed. And if she is the clear MVP of that deck, basically solo carrying it to the top, it's possible that Scorn gets nerfed. Okay, it's possible they start her out as a 1-0 or a 1-1, or they even, make her ramp up slower. Usually they look to lower the floor, but if she's too good and discard just becomes really meta, traditional discard, she probably becomes a 1-1 or 1-0 pretty quickly, okay? So that's something to consider, that, she does need other aspects of the archetype to be powerful and strong. She cannot be solo carrying it, because that's how you get hit with the nerf hammer. Now, to visualize Scorn's floor and her ceiling, this is her at her reasonable worst and reasonable best. Her at her floor is that you draw her later in the game and you don't discard her, okay? Maybe you drew her early, but you did not draw the cards needed to discard her. You just had no way to actually discard her from your hand, in which case she's just a 1-2, right? Pretty simple. It's not the worst floor for 1 cost. It's definitely not competitive, though. But in terms of her ceiling, well, again, if you discard her 3 times, that's a 114. Okay, that is a 114. That is insane. And you can discard her more than 3 times. That's going to be pretty hard. It will be pretty rare, I think, unless you're playing, some kind of Wong shenanigans deck. But if you have a discard deck, you're trying to discard as much as possible, I think you will be able to discard her 3 times, a decent amount, okay? When your draws go right, you can discard her 3 times, I think. And that's going to put her at a 114. With power spread, obviously, any more discard is just +4 power each time. If you end up getting 4 discards, she's a 118, right? This goes crazy. This is definitely overpowered. A 114 in Marvel Snap is overpowered. Where is she on average? I think on average, she might even seem a bit overpowered. I think on average, you're going to probably discard her once or 2 times. And if you discard her twice, she's a 110. Okay, still has that power spread. So still adding, power not to herself, just to herself, but to multiple cards on the board, hopefully different locations, it makes it a bit more safe and secure. But I still think this could be overpowered. Now, the juxtaposition to this is that you have to discard her, right? You are putting in work to discard her. So even though her stats, her power output might seem overpowered, might seem like you're getting a 110, you still did have to dedicate resources and energy to getting that power. Here's my friendly reminder to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you have not already, because just like this buy or bust video, we cover every single new card release in Marvel Snap. So the first deck I wanted to showcase is the traditional discard list. Okay, now there's a few pieces here that could be replaced based on preference. We don't need Proxima Midnight here if you want a different discard card, and you know, she's really the only other card that is Series 5. So if you want to replace her, you go right ahead. Moon Knight or Gambit could be switched out depending on preference. But this deck is very traditional. I mean, we've got the standard Morbius, Dracula, Apocalypse combo. Okay, and we've even got MODOK in here as well. So extremely cheap deck, extremely new player friendly. We really just have Scorn, Proxima, MODOK as the cards that you may be missing. And Scorn's just going to be good here. Okay, we have so much targeted discard now. Remember that Moon Knight has been changed to discard even cost cards, and Swordmaster was changed to discard odd cost cards. Okay, so Swordmaster you can play to hopefully target your Scorn. Okay, it does have some dangers of hitting some other cards. You do have to be a bit strategic, but you can also look to discard Scorn with the Blade, with the Calling Wing, and again with MODOK. You can look to do that on turn 5 or turn 6. And you know, maybe you're discarding Scorn and Apocalypse throughout the course of the game. And on turn 6, you can look to play your Apocalypse and have Dracula discard the Scorn. Or you can look to play, you know, maybe Scorn plus MODOK on turn 6, and then have Dracula discard that Apocalypse. For deck number 2, we have a fairly similar deck to start. We do still have the Dracula and the Apocalypse in here, but now we're looking at a bit more of a combo-y type of thing. We actually have Daken in here with the Collector. Okay, so our idea with this deck is to discard things that will get added to your hand. So we've got the Swarm in here, and we've got Daken. Add some stuff to your hand. You can power up the Collector this way, but it's still good for just discarding a lot of stuff, right? We still have the MODOK in here, so you can still get value from Scorn. And you know, maybe you've played more cards, if you're playing more Swarms, or if you're playing Daken and Scorn gets discarded, powers up Daken before you discard the Muramasa Shard, and he gets doubled. Okay, so you might actually make Daken a 3/6, and then he doubles himself into a 3/12 instead of a 3/8. So that is some interesting synergy there with Daken, kind of like a Sebastian Shaw thing, where Scorn does have some targets out there that do really enjoy the +2 power from her if you can make it work. And last up, you know I like me some cheesy combo decks. We have the Exodia discard deck. For anyone unfamiliar, the Exodia combo in Marvel Snap is when you're looking to do Wong Mystique into Gambit. Okay, then you hit it with Odin to finish it off and try to just clear your opponent's entire board with Gambit, triggering over and over and over. Now, the caveat is that you do need cards in your hand in order for Gambit to discard. Okay, he used to not need it, but he does now. So if your hand is empty, he will stop destroying cards on your opponent's side of the board. But here we have Apocalypse and Scorn, so Gambit can discard them over and over and over, and they will keep coming back to hand, and he can keep killing more stuff. And with Scorn, it's kind of funny, because if he just discards Scorn over and over and over, not only is he destroying stuff on your opponent's side of the board, but you're actually powering up stuff on your own side of the board as well. So this one's really cheesy. You know, you can look to hide the whole combo behind Invisible Woman, and just go for a Wong Gambit Odin or Wong Mystique Gambit behind Invisible Woman. Or you can look to just play it out in the open and just say, hey, I don't think my opponent is playing Cosmo, let's go for it, right? It's not going to have the best win rate. It's a bit more of a fun deck, although it could get some big cube wins if your opponent is not expecting you to be packing Exodia behind Invisible Woman. Alright, so let's talk about this Spotlight Week, because on October 15th, to the 22nd, we have Scorn alongside Jean Grey and Sebastian Shaw. Here are the Spotlight variants as well. In terms of being competitive, I think this is a good week, okay? Scorn, we don't know how she's going to perform, but Jean Grey is in a decent spot right now. Sometimes she varies. Sometimes she sees basically no play. Sometimes she sees a decent amount of play. We did just have the Zabu change come in. It's possible that 4 costs just come back into the meta and 3 costs go out of the meta. We'll have to see how impactful the Zabu change is. He's definitely not as good as he was before. But if he is seeing real play and 4 costs are now great again, then that does change up the whole meta. Okay, so we are going to have to keep an eye on Jean Grey. I do think she's decent to have. It is nice when Hela is really strong in the meta. You play Jean Grey deck, you are wrecking Hela. Okay, there are some just really good deck matchups that Jean Grey has. So those are important to keep an eye out for and just have in your collection. You can use her also in, just ongoing, like Spectrum ongoing decks to power her up. Sebastian Shaw is really good. I mentioned this before in my season spotlights breakdown video. If you're going to play a Silver Surfer deck, you need Sebastian Shaw. Okay, it's pretty simple. Every Silver Surfer deck runs Shaw. He is Series 5. He costs full 6,000 tokens, so getting him here is just good token value as well, while Jean Grey is only Series 4. There's some possibility for Scorn to maybe be able to power up a Shaw like I mentioned, but you're probably just going to go the route of looking to play a Dawkin discard and power up Dawkin. But maybe you play both. Maybe you have a deck with Shaw and Dawkin if you want to get experimental, okay? They are in the same spotlight cache for a reason, potentially. But he's just good to have. He's nice. He's pretty stuck to Surfer, but Second Dinner has been pushing the power up deck. I don't know if there's a great name for it, but it's just like the power up, power buff deck. They just buffed Okoye to be a 2/3. They keep pushing and they keep buffing this archetype. It's basically been non-existent, but I think Second Dinner is going to keep buffing it until it is, okay? Because we have Okoye. It all started really with Sebastian Shaw, and after he's come out, we've gotten some more pieces for it, right? I mean, they buffed Okoye, they changed America Chavez. We did get Fastos coming into the game. We got Gwenpool coming into the game. All of these cards that will power up other cards in your hand and or in your deck and just add power to them. And then you're obviously looking to hit cards like Sebastian Shaw, like Mysterio, like Brood, okay? So at some point, I think that deck is just going to be meta. It seems that Second Dinner is going to keep buffing it until it's meta, and that will be a second home for Sebastian Shaw. He will have the Silver Surfer decks, and then he will have these power up or power buff decks, whatever you want to call them. In terms of the variants here, I think they're good variants. The Scorn variant, well, she's new, and this is her Spotlight variant, so you're going to spend a lot of tokens and or keys chasing after both. It's really cool. I love the frame break. I love the angle of it. The Jean Grey one is nice as well. She does have a lot of really good variants. Jean Grey has a ton of variants in the game, so this one is kind of competing with others, but it is still good. The Sebastian Shaw one I think is really cool. I'm excited to see how the animation looks as well. I do believe all this glow, this light, between his hands is going to have really nice animations. Maybe get some cape animation on the back there, his long jacket thingy, whatever you call it. If that's kind of, moving in the wind as well, that would be nice. But I think this is a good Spotlight week. It's solid. If you don't own Shaw, this is great to chase after. If you don't own Jean Grey, I don't know if I'd chase after just her. She is Series 4. She's only 3,000 tokens, and she goes in and out of the meta. So I don't know if I'd chase after it just for Jean Grey, but I would chase after it just for Shaw or for both Shaw and Jean Grey. And now it's time to look at my ratings and yours. Okay, we've got my ratings on the left here and the community ratings on the right. The community ratings will be coming from the survey that I put out with my October season preview video that many of you voted on. So thank you for voting, and let's see how we compare. In terms of being flexible, we're in agreement. Okay, myself and the community both think she is not flexible at all. Okay, she is designed for discard, but even more specifically than that, she's designed for this traditional discard, the Apocalypse discard decks, okay? Because there's multiple archetypes of discard, the two biggest being this traditional Apocalypse discard, the other one being Hela. And Hela discard did just get a nerf with the Hellcow nerf, but I don't think Scorn's going to fit the Hela discard deck well. So she's not just tied to discard, she's tied to a sub-archetype of discard, right? Really, really niche, but potentially really, really powerful for that specific list. In terms of being competitive, I think she's going to be good, the community is pretty split, actually. A lot of people think she's going to be good. A lot of people think she's going to be amazing. So those were the two highest voting categories, or ratings voted on by the community. People kind of in agreement, she's going to be good or amazing. We'll have to see where she falls. I originally had Scorn as amazing, but again, I'm really worried about her archetype. Like, I know Scorn is good. Like, you can just look at the numbers, the power. She scales really, really well. Okay, that is good scaling. You cannot deny that. But how much of an impact will it actually make? That's the unknown. Okay, we don't actually know how good she will be in game, how well she will perform. Because if she's great or even amazing, but her deck is still at like a 50% win rate, well, she's not having an amazing performance, right? You still have a problem there. And so my recommendation for Scorn is a wait and see, unless you play discard. If you do play traditional discard, if you've always liked, let's say since you were in pool 1 or pool 2, you've always liked just playing, Dracula, Apocalypse discard, or maybe you didn't have Dracula by then, but, playing Morbius, Apocalypse discard, you may want it right away. Okay, she's just going to fit in. If I'm a big discard player, I'm going to get her right away. She's just going to work. If I'm not a discard player, and I'm only looking to play a card in a different archetype if it becomes really competitive and meta, okay, if you're only going to play Scorn if she becomes top of the meta, then you should wait and see. I don't think you should chase after her. Really, what hurts Scorn is not her powering up, it's how niche she is, and that you need to discard her multiple times, okay? So I think for most players, even if Scorn is a strong card, most players will not get that much use out of her, because most people are not running around playing Apocalypse discard all the time. So I do think it depends on you. I think it depends on your preference. I'm excited for Scorn because I do think she's really strong and exciting, but I'm a bit concerned of how her decks will perform, because traditional discard is not the best. It's not the most consistent. So we're going to have to see how that works out, what she does for the archetype, if she can make it consistent enough to be really, really strong, in which case more players will start playing the archetype, right? If it's the top of the meta, more people will flock to traditional discard, and then more people will want Scorn. So wait and see in that aspect, but really she's just too niche. And just some final reminders is that the safe strategy is always to wait a few days after a card is released before making your final decision if you do want to open it or skip it, okay? Unless you need the rest of the Spotlight Week. Again, if you need Sebastian Shaw and Jean Grey already, then go ahead and open right away, because we know how those cards perform already in the game. The community, myself included, is wrong about cards all the time. Maybe Scorn ends up being horrible, and the traditional discard is still bad deck, okay? Or maybe she ends up being amazing, and traditional discard is at the top of the meta. We don't know until we wait and see. Sometimes cards don't work as believed, certain interactions. I'm not sure we have those questions here with Scorn, because she should just work like Apocalypse, but it's possible she's coded differently. That does happen sometimes. So if she doesn't end up working in terms of how she gets discarded just like Apocalypse, that would be kind of funny. It would probably be a bug, honestly, that they would have to fix. But sometimes we don't know. And so you should prioritize cards that just fit your playstyle. Again, with Scorn, if you're a discard player, she's probably your best pick of the whole season. If you're not a discard player, she might be your worst pickup of the whole season. Okay, it does depend on you. And great cards get nerfed all the time, and horrible cards get buffed all the time. So if she ends up being too good, she might not be too good for very long. And if she's horrible, they probably look to make her better, and then she might be worth it at that point. We just don't know. Right? We don't know what Second Dinner is going to do in the future. So prioritize cards that you think you will play and that you'll have a lot of fun with. So let me know your thoughts of Scorn. If there are any nice decks or combos besides just the traditional archetype that you think she's going to be good in, let me know those decks in the comments down below, because I think if she does find more homes than just being super niche, that could be really helpful for her. So let me know, let others know. And until then, stay positive. I'll see you next time.